The International Booker Prize celebrates fiction translated into English and published in the UK. The 2025 prize winner will be announced in just a couple of days, and before this week, I had not read any of the longlisted or shortlisted books yet, in part due to a series of mistakes I made. I'm not the kind of person that reads the full long list for book prizes, but I do try to look at the long lists and choose at least one or two that look appealing and that also makes it more fun to follow along with the prize and see how the one or two I read do. And in my spring TBR video, the book from the International Booker long list that I mentioned most wanting to read was On the Calculation of Volume, Volume 1. And I have wanted to read that book since last fall because I love timey-wimey stuff. But when the book came in from my library last year, I failed to pick it up in time. I was busy and I just lost track of what day it was. And then this time I put it on hold again, but I suspended the hold because I didn't want it to come in before I was ready to pick it up. Smart. But when I went to go unsuspend the hold, I apparently just deleted my hold instead of unsuspending it. So back to the end of the queue for me. And because it's a popular book, it still hasn't come in from the library this time. So I take this as a sign that the universe didn't really want me to read On the Calculation of Volume, Volume 1 before the prize was announced, and a sign saying, Danny, try to read something else from the long list. There's other good stuff. And so I have. In this past week, I picked up Small Boat by Vincent Delecroix, translated by Helen Stevenson, as an ebook on Haveland. I also picked up from my library Under the Eye of the Big Bird by Hiromi Kawakami and translated by Yoneda. These were both first-time authors for me, but the premise of each really caught my attention, and I'm really glad to have read both of them. I'll start by talking about Small Boat. This is a very brief novel based on a true story of a small inflatable vessel that capsized in the English Channel in 2021, leading to the deaths of at least 27 migrants who were seeking asylum in England. When that boat started taking water, the migrants on the boat called both the English and the French for rescue, but it was unclear whether they were in French or English waters, and in any case, the French Navy never sent any help. Small Boat explores a fictionalized account of those events, interrogating the mindset of the telephone operator on the French rescue line who did not send aid and who was in fact recorded saying things that were quite callous about the situation that night. The book is told in 3 sections, and the telephone operator narrates the first and third sections. The first section portrays the operator voluntarily going to the police to be interviewed as part of an official inquiry into the events of that night. And this is a really gripping device to explore questions of ethics and culpability. The narrator is very self-interested and trying to avoid accountability at every turn, and it becomes clear that in this way, she is not really a reliable narrator. At the same time, the narrator seems aware of the weakness of her arguments and justifications, or at least that they will be received as weak by the police inspector. And this section sets up this intricate portrayal of the so-called banality of evil, the ways that jurisdictional boundaries and protocol and the detachment that comes with answering these calls night after night contributed to the operator's actions. Throughout the first section especially, I found the prose style really engrossing. It's written in this stream of consciousness style with long asides, and the way the narrator circles accountability with these long circuitous sentences really made this character and these thought processes come alive with this kind of buried anxiety. It was really uncomfortable to read. The narrator also does some reflection on the seafaring and shipwreck terms we use in our everyday idiomatic speech, the way we use verbs like sinking, foundering, and bailing as a kind of extended metaphor in our everyday speech. And I found those expressions really interesting to dwell on as they came up in the text. The second section depicts the night of the crossing from the point of view of one of the individuals on the boat. As I was reading this, I was thinking, is this too much? Like, the author didn't trust the reader to have empathy for these people, but I think I've come around to it. It's quite brief in an already brief book, and I think it provides a haunting interlude between the first and the final chapters that are narrated by the phone operator. The final section shows our narrator running along the coastline. She's been suspended from her job, and she's considering the sea as a force of nature and thinking more about her guilt. This had me reevaluating the first chapter in certain ways. The police inspector is a kind of mirror for the narrator, and the narrator is a mirror for the nation. Even as we, the reader, are seeing like a blatant failure to act on the part of someone whose professional responsibility it was to act and provide aid in this moment, it also causes you to consider the inaction of the everyday citizen and the explicit and implicit biases and beliefs that contribute to a crisis and a tragedy like this one. Delecroix is a philosopher, and that really comes through in the questions of morality and culpability and the way these are explored so intricately and sensitively. He doesn't lean on systemic culpability in a way that really relieves any of the pressure of guilt on the narrator, but he also humanizes the narrator in a way that makes you think about the ways that any person might crack with the everyday beliefs we're surrounded with and pressures that we live with. As I was reading this, I was reflecting on a nonfiction book I read earlier this year, which is Everyone Who Is Gone Is Here, that tells the history of the flow of refugees from Central America to the US. And I just think it's important as citizens to think about how our governments treat refugees and migrants and the language that's used to talk about these crises. And I think Small Boats offers a really gripping take on that question and is going to stay with me for a really long time. Under the Eye of the Big Bird engages with deep philosophical questions of a much different sort. This is speculative fiction that asks questions about biological alteration and evolution and what it means to be human and what it means to survive as a species. This is a novel in stories. The chapters are interconnected vignettes that span not just generations, but millennia, because, as I was saying, this book is interested in evolutionary time spans. The core premise of the book is that humanity is going extinct, and humans now live in small, isolated settlements that are under the care of people called watchers and mothers. In this event, to ensure the future of human survival, we are also dabbling in bioengineering and cloning and trying to encourage speciation and evolutionary advancement. But this story is told in a non-linear way that seems to be deliberately disorienting. The way that the chapters relate to each other in terms of time and place is pretty unclear, and as we move between time and place, each chapter is concerned with different questions. And it is not until the latter half of the book that you really have enough evidence to start piecing together how the different chapters might be placed in relation to each other. So I would encourage anyone to go into this book with a certain acceptance of ambiguity. One aspect that makes the overarching narrative particularly disorienting is the prevalence of cloning. Certain genetic lines are replicated over centuries or even millennia, with individuals sharing the same name across generations. This blurs the boundaries of time and raises compelling questions about individuality and genetic inheritance and the cycles of time. That said, something that I liked about this book that made the world building a little easier to digest is that a lot of the thematic nuggets are told in pairs of chapters. One chapter will introduce or shed light on a new settlement or genetic quirk or an aspect of this new world order, and the second chapter will stay in the same ballpark. Often will stay in the same setting, but the perspective will shift to a different character, and we'll get even more insight into that new idea or new question. That said, I do think the novel as a whole suffers a little bit from this uneven balance between under and over explaining these key elements of the world building. For me, after the first few chapters, I caught the vibe and I got into something like a flow state, but then in the second to last chapter, there's this tone shift. It very much shifts into an expository tone, laying out pretty clearly how the earlier chapters fit together. And that chapter just felt a little bit out of place to me. I liked some of the ideas presented in that chapter, and it presents some thinking about artificial intelligence that is very apropos for a book originally written in 2016, but it felt like an awkward turn to telling and not showing, and I kind of wish it had been presented in a different way. But overall, I thought this book was really fascinating, and I enjoyed how unconventionally it was told in ways that made me attend to the story more. But because of the dreamlike, soft sci-fi atmosphere that is more based in philosophical pondering than plot, I could see readers who prefer their books to have more tightly reasoned causal consequences being unsatisfied with this one. I'm not the first person to make this comparison, but I think fans of How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu would enjoy this book as well. That is also told with interconnected stories over a long time span, considering the fragility of humanity. But Under the Eye of the Big Bird is certainly more dreamlike and metaphorical in its approach. So I didn't end up reading the International Booker book that I originally planned to in the time frame I originally expected, but it worked out well because I got to read these two extremely thought-provoking books. Between the two, I preferred Small Boat over Under the Eye of the Big Bird. It just felt more gripping and immediate and what I'm resonating with more in this moment. But they were both really rewarding in their own registers, and I'd be happy to see either of them win this prize. Let me know your thoughts on these books in the comments, as well as your thoughts on the International Booker as a whole this year. I'm still planning on reading On the Calculation of Volume when I can get my hands on it, but we'll see when that happens. Thanks for watching, and until next time.